of PROP. That's what it's referred to, correct?
Sorry to interrupt, Your Honor. Again, this is something that's beyond the scope of the direct investigation. So we reject to do it on that basis.
It goes both to bias as well as to his testimony with respect to the issue of duration and his criticism of statements that are being made based upon a suggestion that opioids may be prescribed for long-term treatment of non-cancer chronic pain. So it goes to the heart of his opinions.
He's saying that responsible opioid, or prescribing opioids responsibly, which is the name of the organization, demonstrates some sort of bias. I guess he asked some of those questions. The point is, we didn't go into any of the PROP history in the direct examination.
I understand your objection. I am going to overrule and allow for this line of questioning.
Am I correct, doctor, that PROP's mission is to reduce opioid-related morbidity and mortality by promoting cautious and responsible prescribing practices?
Yes, I see nothing wrong with that.
Did I ask you if there's anything wrong with that?
I'm answering your question. Yes, I am aware of that.
Okay, that's good. You seem a little defensive to me.
I'm sorry if I am.
Okay. Now, PROP has 3 arms to try to accomplish its mission, correct?
That I'm not sure about.
Okay, one, it has a prescriber education arm that promotes more cautious prescribing by giving clinicians what you would consider to be accurate, evidence-based information about opioid risks and benefits, correct?
Yes.
It also has a consumer education arm that works with stakeholders to improve access to accurate information about prescription opioids, correct?
Again, I assume so.
Yeah, and you're aware of the fact that that's part of what PROP does, right?
I understand that the mission of PROP is to try to educate the community about proper uses of opioids and how to do it in a more effective manner to have more sustainable long-term outcomes in managing pain.
Right, and it's out there providing that information as we are here today, right?
Yes, I believe it's an active organization.
And it's been doing that, at least as far as you know, since 2011, because that's when you first became a member, right?
Yes, sir.
And you're aware as well, are you not, that one of the things that PROP does is advocacy with state and federal bodies,
Yes, sir.
including the FDA, right?
I haven't been involved on the advocacy effort, so I'm not sure who they speak to.
Well, do you recall that in 2012, PROP submitted a citizen petition to the FDA that specifically addressed, among other things, the duration of the prescribing of opioids?
I don't recall.
Your Honor, if I may approach?
Yes, you may. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Doctor, I've handed...
Our objection to this. This is a letter to Dr. Kolodny. I'm very much looking forward to their questioning Dr. Kolodny about PROP. But to the extent this is something that Dr. Mazur has never seen, et cetera, I'd like them to have time to review it. And honestly, we prefer this to be reserved for Dr. Kolodny's testimony. He will be testifying.
All right. Before I rule in the objection, would you want to put this letter in context to address Mr. Duck's concerns?
Yes, Your Honor. I mean, one, I would ask the court to take judicial notice of it. It's a response of the FDA to a petition that was submitted by PROP in 2012. This response is September of 2013. My questions of Dr. Mazludus are whether he is aware, as he offers these opinions today, that the FDA specifically rejected a request by PROP to limit duration, which is one of the issues that he's raised as a basis for what he has claimed to be false and misleading information.
We object to the entire characterization of that. I thought he was going to start asking questions whenever you asked if you want to put it in context, rather than him trying to mischaracterize facts and truth. So I'll sit and listen if he wants to try to put that in context, or not try to mischaracterize.
All right, Mr. Duck, I'll overrule your objections and allow for Mr. Yoder to question the witness.
Thank you. Currently, you sit on the executive board for PROP, correct?
Yes, sir.
And in fact, you were appointed to the executive board in 2013, right?
Yes, sir.
And if you'll take a look at Exhibit J1571, you'll see the stamp date is September 10, 2013, correct?
Correct.
So, in connection with your membership with PROP or your service as an executive board member of PROP, did you learn that the FDA had rejected in 2013 PROP's request that the FDA specify or recommend a maximum daily dose or duration of use for prescribed opioids?
Sir, I don't recall when I was initiated into the executive committee, and I don't recall this letter. I'd be happy to read through it and comment on it more, but the fact that I don't recall this is difficult for me to answer the question.
Okay. Take a look at page 11. Section Roman numeral 4, request for maximum dose and duration of use. You'll see there the FDA states that the agency declines to specify or recommend a maximum daily dose or duration of use for any opioid at this time for the reason described below. Now, if I understand your testimony correctly, you believe there should be a limited duration indicated for the use of prescription opioids, correct?
No, sir, that mischaracterizes my opinion.
Okay. So are you aware of the fact as we sit here today that the FDA has declined to impose a recommended or maximum duration of use?
I mean, this is the letter saying that, so I can't reject that. But I can say that at the time, there were many patients on much, much higher doses of opioids.
Okay, take a look at the first page, page 1. And if you take a look at the first paragraph, you'll see the FDA is stating the requests that are being made by PROP. There's 3 requests. You see that?
Yes, sir.
You agree the second one is to add a maximum daily dose equivalent to 100 milligrams of morphine for non-cancer pain. Do you see that?
I do, but can I note that the date the letter was received by the FDA was July 26, 2012, which would have been before my presence on the executive board of PROP. I'm happy to discuss the science. I'd happy to discuss the science, but this is really outside of my expertise, whether there's, legal decisions or regulatory decisions made by the FDA or rejected by the FDA, initiated by PROP. I think Dr. Kolodny is a better person to ask about that, but my expert testimony is on management of pain, the scientific basis of it, and any scientific literature that you'd like to discuss that would endorse my opinion that there was never any, well, not my opinion, the fact that there was never any evidence suggesting long-term, long-acting opioids were effective for chronic pain.
Take a look at this letter, if you would, on page 2. Section 1, background, item A. This is the FDA. Opioids are a class of powerful pain-relieving agents that includes oxycodone, hydrocodone, and morphine, among others. When prescribed and used properly, opioids can effectively manage pain and alleviate suffering, clearly a public health priority. So do you disagree with the FDA?
No, sir, it says when prescribed and used properly. I believe that when used properly, there's a role for opioids in management of pain.
And would you agree that the FDA has set forth how prescription opioids may be used properly in the approvals of indication and use that it's made?
Same objection to the regulatory issues, Judge.
Again, the questions need to be confined to the witness's personal knowledge. He's not designated as an expert on regulatory matters.
Sure. So it's your understanding, is it not, that the proper prescription and use of opioids is as set forth by the FDA in their approved indications and usages?
Again, I can't comment on what the FDA intended with that sentence. And it's broad enough to give clinicians the opportunity to prescribe medications.
According to the approved indications and usages, correct?
Again, I can't speak on behalf of the FDA, sir.
Well, sir, you're a doctor, correct?
Yes, sir.
You prescribe Schedule II narcotics, correct?
I do.
You know those are heavily regulated by the FDA, correct?
I can only make that assumption. I can't confirm that that's what their primary intent or goal is.
So is it your testimony under oath that you pay no attention to what the FDA has actually approved for the indications and use of the narcotics that you prescribe?
That's not what I'm saying, no, sir.
You pay attention to those, don't you?
Your Honor, I object on this line of questioning again. We all know that the FDA does not regulate physicians. They regulate pharmaceutical companies and other things.
Objection sustained.
Would you agree that treatment of chronic pain is complex?
Most certainly.
Would you agree that that treatment cannot be done with a one-size-fits-all?
Yes.
Would you agree that it's not easy to measure pain?
I don't know if I can agree to that.
You think there's objective measurements of pain that are available?
I think the question is the topic is more complex than that.
Okay.
I don't think your question underlies the assumption that pain can be subjective or objectively measured.
Fair to say you don't treat all chronic pain patients the same.
No, sir, I don't.
For each patient, you have to develop an individualized treatment plan, correct?
I do, and again, a chronic pain patient would be the equivalent of saying a cancer patient. It's a very broad topic. So, no, I don't treat every single patient the same, nor does any other clinician.
I thought we already established that you treat both cancer pain patients and non-cancer chronic pain patients, correct?
I'm sorry, let me clarify. That wasn't my point in labeling cancer. My point was just the breadth of science, the breadth of field can't be reduced to saying a decision, yes or no, on the entire breadth of a field. That's all I'm saying.
It wasn't my question. Again, just break it down and take it step by step, okay? Do you currently treat non-cancer chronic pain patients?
I treat patients who have pain complaints with other underlying conditions causing those pain complaints.
And are some of those patients who are not suffering from cancer?
The use of suffering. Suffering cancer, I don't know if you can suffer cancer.
Who have cancer?
People who have cancer,
Who are diagnosed with cancer.
I treat patients who have cancer and who don't have cancer, both of whom could have non-cancer related pain or cancer related pain in the cancer population.
So let's do it this way. Among the patients that you treat, does that include patients who are complaining about non-cancer related pain?
Yes, sir.
And do some of those patients, have some of those patients not been diagnosed with cancer?
Yes.
All right. Now, in coming up with a treatment plan for those patients, I take it one of the things you do is try to identify and evaluate the specific needs of the patient,
Yes.
and also the specific risks of proposed or possible treatments, correct?
Yes, sir.
And to do that, you spend time with the patient, you told us that, correct?
Yes.
You run various tests on the patient, correct?
Yes.
You try to review medical records from the patient if they're available, correct?
Yes. Yes.
If they're available, right?
Well, I'm just saying this is all part could be encompassed by I examine and define the problem to treat the patient. And if you want to move forward in asking the question that you're going after, I'd be happy to go there.
We're going to do better if you just wait for each question, trying to anticipate what you want to say down the road, okay?
Please proceed.
Okay. So, you would agree, would you not, that a physician who has undertaken the type of effort that you've just described in trying to evaluate a patient's needs and to determine the best course of treatment would be in the best position to make that determination, correct?
Provided they have the right background and influence, yes, I think that they're capable of making that decision. But when their education has been biased in a certain direction, then no, I think they can make wrong decisions.
And you think you would be in a better position to make that decision for a patient that you've never seen?
I believe that I, as a pain specialist, can make a proper decision about a patient in pain, but I could not make a proper decision about a patient who has heart disease or a patient who has cancer, and I would defer to my colleagues if they were to give me input on what I should do with a patient who has cancer or heart disease.
Do you think you're in a better position to make a treatment determination on a pain patient that you've not seen than the doctor who is the treating physician of that patient?
Sir, I don't think that anybody outside of the patient-clinician relationship should be making that decision for them. However, I think that the clinician needs to be educated with the proper knowledge to be able to make those decisions. And a pharmaceutical rep who comes in, or a CME program who comes in, providing input on what you should do with your quote-unquote chronic pain patient is just as inaccurate as me as a clinician trying to sit here and diagnose or treat specific patients. My objective is to educate clinicians about the proper management of pain and help them make the right decision.
I have no idea what question you were answering there, so let me try again, okay?
Please proceed.
Are you saying that you think you would be in a better position to prescribe treatment for a pain patient than the doctor who is treating that patient here in Oklahoma?
Sir, again, I can't make that decision, no, but I can educate the clinicians on how to proceed.
Well, you're being very critical of doctors, sir. You're saying they don't read risk disclosures, they don't pay attention to them, they're influenced, and so they can't make proper decisions. Can you name for me one doctor in Oklahoma that you believe has been so influenced by misinformation, by pharmaceutical companies, by opioid manufacturers, that they're not in a position to make a proper individualized determination for their patient?
Yes, sir.
Give me names.
It's Dr. Beeman, Dr.
Wait,
Herndon,
Dr. Beeman is a paid expert
Dr.
from the state,
Herndon?
right?
Dr. Crawford.
Scott?
Your Honor, I don't want to get too far afield with prior rulings that you've made in this case about disclosing doctors. The fact is, Dr. Maslin has talked to a number of doctors who may not be aware of prior rulings of the court about disclosing doctors' names. I don't think we realize that he's talked to a number of doctors. here, so I just want to interject. Maybe it's not necessary that you guys raise it.
May we approach briefly, Your Honor?
Yes, please do.
Would you agree, doctor, that a patient here in Oklahoma can't lawfully obtain a prescription opioid without a prescription written by a licensed physician registered with the DEA?
Yes, sir. Unless they're purchasing it illegally.
Yeah, we understand there's diversion and abuse. I'm just asking about lawful use of prescribed opioids. For a patient, they need a prescription written by a licensed physician in this state registered with the DEA, correct?
Yes.
As part of your work in this case, forming the opinions that you've reached, did you review any medical literature?
I am constantly reading medical literature. Yes, sir.
And in your CV, you listed a number of articles that you apparently thought were relevant to your opinions, correct?
No, in my CV, I listed the articles that I either published or participated on. In my disclosure, I listed articles that I've read informing that disclosure.
And did you list in that disclosure all of the articles that you considered for purposes of reaching your opinions here?
No, sir.
So let me ask you, if I might, whether you considered some particular articles, okay? Did you consider a study by Christopher Wu called Systematic Review and Analysis of Post-Discharge Symptoms After Outpatient Surgery that was published in 2002?
I don't recall, sir. I'd be happy to take a look at the article if you have it.
Are you familiar with the article?
I don't recall.
Okay. Can you help us? If I may approach your Honor?
Yes, you may. Thank you.
Thank you.
So my question really is a simple one, whether this is an article that you considered in arriving at your opinions that you've offered here.
I don't recall.
Okay. Did you consider another article by Christopher Wu entitled Morphine versus Mexilatine for Treatment of Post-Amputation Pain, a randomized, placebo-controlled crossover trial published in August of 2008?
I don't recall.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
So I've handed you the article, and again, my simple question is whether this is one of the articles that you reviewed for purposes of forming the opinions that you've testified to here.
I don't recall.
How about an article entitled Efficacy of Intrathecal Morphine and Clonidine in the Treatment of Pain After Spinal Cord Injury by Philip Siddall that was published in 2000?
I don't recall. And it's intrathecal morphine and clonidine.
I am sure there's more than one word on this pronouncer, so thank
That's
you.
okay. I'm just here to educate.
May I approach?
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
So I handed you the article, and again, my question is whether this is one of the articles that you reviewed and considered in forming the opinions that you've offered here.
And sir, it's difficult for me to recall all the articles. No, I don't recall.
Okay, well, it may be one that you look at and say, yeah, I know I actually did consider that, but you just
Sure.
don't remember one way or the other, right?
Yes, sir.
How about an article entitled Tramadol in Neuropathic Pain After Spinal Cord Injury, a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial by Cecilia Norbrink that was published in 2009.
I don't recall.
Let me hand you that article. I may approach.
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
And my question again, Doctor, is whether this is an article that you reviewed and considered in forming the opinions that you've offered here.
I don't recall.
In your view, can prescription opioids be used to treat neuropathic pain?
I think that there are more effective solutions.
Not really my question. Do you think that prescription opioids can be appropriately used to treat neuropathic pain?
I think that it can be used as part of an overall treatment plan, but not a mainstay. In fact, opioids can make the problem worse.
Okay, let me ask you if you read and considered for purposes of reaching your opinions you've offered in this matter, a study by Anana Finnerup called An Evidence-Based Algorithm for the Treatment of Neuropathic Pain that was published in May of 2007.
I don't recall.
I may approach
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
So I've handed you the article, and my question again is whether this is an article that you reviewed and considered in forming the opinions that you've offered here.
I don't recall, sir.
Let me ask you about one last study, also by Nana Finnerup, entitled Pharmacotherapy for Neuropathic Pain in Adults, Systematic Review, Meta-Analysis, and Updated New PSIG. I won't even try to figure out how that should be pronounced. Recommendations, published in February of 2015. Do you recall whether you reviewed and considered that?
No, sir, I don't recall.
I may approach her.
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
Somebody needs to write it down. So I've handed you the article, Doctor, and my question is whether now, having looked at it, is this an article that you reviewed and considered in forming your opinions that you've offered here?
I don't recall. No, sir.
And Your Honor, I told that we should probably mark these as court exhibits if we could, so we have a record of them. And we can do that at the break, just so.
I think I've got to object. I assume Mr. Yoder was going to establish relevance of each of these articles. I haven't yet heard that. So we would object on relevance grounds. I don't think me or our witness knows it's actually in these studies. Maybe he's reviewed them in the past, maybe not. But without having had a chance to review them, we would object on relevance grounds at the very least.
And Your Honor, I'm not asking them to be admitted at this time. I'm just marking them so we have a proper record.
We'll go ahead and allow for them to be considered as court's exhibits, not as evidence. I think we left off with 32, as I recall.
We'll get it figured out, Your Honor, and get them marked.
Okay, we'll do it at the conclusion today. Thank you.
So in your testimony this morning, Doctor, you made reference to some type of book or handbook that you were a co-author of that was published while you were at Johns Hopkins, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So I'd like to have you take a look at that, or at least a portion of that. You were a co-author of a chapter on chronic pain, right?
Yes, I was.
Okay, so if we could pull up Exhibit J0354. And if I may approach, Your Honor.
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
Is Exhibit J354, the Johns Hopkins Anesthesiology Handbook, or at least the chapter on chronic pain that you co-authored that you mentioned in your testimony earlier today?
Yes.
Your Honor, I move this exhibit into evidence.
J354 will be admitted into the evidence.
May we publish?
Yes, you may.
So this handbook was published in what year?
– 2010.
And if you look at the page 411, that you use the exhibit number, which is going to be page 3. And you're listed there as one of the co-authors, correct?
Yes.
Along with Adam Carancini, I may have mispronounced that,
Carinci.
Matthew Crooks, Brandon Lennox, and yourself, and then edited by Paul Christo, correct?
Yes.
And this chapter that you co-authored, the whole chapter really was focused on chronic pain, right?
Yes.
And was it during the time that you were doing your fellowship at MD Anderson, or had you already finished that and were you now in practice?
This is when I co-wrote this when I was a resident at Johns Hopkins, but it was published while I was at MD Anderson.
Okay. So if you turn to page 26, you'll see section F is entitled Treatment, correct?
Sorry, I'm on the wrong page.
Page 26. We're looking at the page number at the bottom right-hand corner.
And which section, I'm sorry?
Section F,
Treatments.
treatment,
Yes.
right? And the treatment we're talking about is the treatment of chronic pain, right?
Yes.
And this chapter is addressing not just cancer-related chronic pain, but non-cancer chronic pain, correct?
Yes.
And the first two items here for treatment, number one, treatment should be early, aggressive, and multidisciplinary. Do you see that?
Yes.
And second, goals include restoration of function, pain relief, and psychological improvement, correct?
Yes.
And you would consider both of those statements proper statements regarding treatment of chronic pain, correct?
Yes, that fits with everything that I've testified.
Okay. Now, you were here yesterday when Ms. Dean Eshelman was being questioned about the Imagine the Possibilities Pain Coalition, correct?
Yes.
And you understood that Mr. Beckworth was questioning her about certain statements that were mostly made in minutes of various meetings, correct? Remember that?
I don't recall.
You remember the publication? The only publication that that coalition ever published?
I don't recall.
Object to be on the scope of the direct.
Sustained.
Well, Your Honor, he has testified as to all of this claimed misinformation that's been produced by the opioids industry, including my clients. And this is one of the materials that the state has offered up in support of their argument that there was misinformation. And this witness is avoiding getting into the specifics of a lot of the information that was published because it doesn't really support what they're trying to say here. I should be able to question him about information that they've attributed to my client and question him to show that there was nothing false or misleading about it. His testimony is essentially that everything they're doing is a campaign of misinformation. And we absolutely should be given the right to show that materials that they've even referenced as supporting their claim does no such thing. Absolutely should be able to do that.
I assume that's what their intention was when they used this exhibit with this measurement and we cross-examined on it, but I never used this document.
I'll sustain the objections outside the scope of direct.
Would you agree that another way to say early treatment of chronic pain would be rapid treatment of chronic pain?
I agree that early treatment is important, but the literature references early treatment as in a particular form of treatment, and that trifecta model of the peripheral nerve, the nervous system, and the brain. Early treatment means intercepting the pain signal before it reaches the spinal cord. So opioids are not effective early treatment. It's effectively trying to block the pain signal before it gets to the spinal cord and causes that domino effect of hypersensitivity and all those regulatory changes that affect how that spinal cord bundles signals and sends it up to the brain.
We'll take a look at the next page, page 27. And you'll see in item lower cap F, it specifically addresses opioids, right?
Yes.
And the first statement there, usually employed when pain fails to respond to other modalities, correct?
Yes.
What does that mean?
I believe you're misinterpreting the reason I placed this on my disclosures. My reason.
Sir,
I'm answering your question, if you allow me.
you're assuming I mean something by my questions. You're speculating as to what I'm trying to do.
Why don't you rephrase or re-ask the question again?
Sure, and I, again, would appreciate you could try to answer my question instead of trying to say what you think I'm trying to do. So I think we'll go much quicker. So my question is, do you agree with the statement that is set forth in this chapter that you co-authored, that prescription opioids are usually employed when pain fails to respond to other modalities?
Yes.
Okay. And by modalities, you mean other types of treatment, correct?
Yes.
So you believe that in treatment of chronic pain, the strategy should include different modalities, a multimodal type pain management plan, correct?
Correct.
So the second point you make here is long-acting or sustained release type is better choice than short-acting type. You see that?
Yes.
And that was the statement that was made in this chapter on treatment of chronic pain in the book that you co-authored, correct?
Yes.
Then you go on to say that you should consider sustained release morphine or oxycodone, extended release oxymorphone, or transdermal fentanyl, correct?
Yes, but I don't agree with that statement. The reason I had this listed
I
on our
didn't-
disclosure, sir.
I didn't ask you that, sir. That is the statement that's made in this chapter of this book that you co-authored, right?
Yes.
Your counsel can ask you if there's an explanation for that, okay?
Yes, sir.
Transdermal fentanyl is what Duragesic is, right?
Yes.
Now, fentanyl, we've heard testimony that it's a synthetic that was invented by Mr. Janssen some years ago, correct?
Yes.
And fentanyl has a number of uses beyond a transdermal fentanyl patch, correct?
Correct.
It can be used in surgery as part of anesthesia,
Yes.
and you learned that when you were in med school, correct?
Yes.
Did that when you were doing your residency in anesthesiology?
Correct.
and you don't practice as an anesthesiologist anymore, correct?
Not anymore.
But you're familiar with that use of fentanyl, correct?
Yes,
And it's a good use, right? When appropriate.
when appropriate.
It's always got to be appropriate. We can always agree on that. It's also used in epidural blocks, correct?
Yes,
And you learned that in medical school?
more residency.
And in your residency when you were doing the anesthesiology, correct?
Yes.
Okay. But again, when appropriately used, a good drug, right?
Yes,
And it's also then used in the transdermal fentanyl patches, right?
it has current uses in fentanyl as a patch.
And that's different than the illegal fentanyl that's been coming into our country recently, right?
They're the same chemical.
But one's legal and one's illegal, right?
Based on your definition, yes, one's legal, one's illegal.
Did you make any effort to try to determine what impact in Oklahoma the import of illegal fentanyl has had?
That's well outside my jurisdiction, sir.
Did you make any effort to try to determine the impact, if any, of the import of other illegal drugs into Oklahoma?
Your Honor, I object is outside the scope of the direct.
Sustained.
If you look at item 5, it says Tramadol is a weak U receptor agonist and inhibits serotonin and norepinephrine. I may have mispronounced that too.
Norepinephrine.
Norepinephrine. I still can't say it.
That's okay.
Reuptake. Okay? Tramadol is the active pharmaceutical ingredient in, bless you, Ultraset, right?
Yes,
And Ultram?
yes.
Now, you were asked about these call notes a while ago, and do you know what drug the call note you talked about in terms of a sprain or a strain, do you know what drug that was referencing?
Yes, Tramadol.
And Tramadol, it says, is a weak U receptor. What does that mean?
Mu receptor is the receptor that absorbs opioids and has that downstream effect. It's also the receptor that changes its messenger system when it's constantly bombarded with opioids. So that's part of the tolerance issue.
And what does it mean by a weak?
It means it has a lower affinity for the mu receptor than other opioids do, but it still has an affinity. It just means it can be displaced by or endogenous or human-produced opioids.
And what does it mean, agonist?
Agonist just means that it's targeting a receptor and activating it, versus an antagonist, which would target the receptor and deactivate it.
And am I correct that in part because Tramadol is a weak mu receptor, it is not a Schedule II drug?
It's a scheduled drug. It's still on the scheduled list because it's a
Is
mu
it
receptor.
Schedule II?
It's a lower schedule. It's a lower tier schedule.
And it was only scheduled fairly recently, correct?
Object on the regulatory.
Sustained.
You had mentioned as well in your testimony the concept of pseudo-addiction. And if I recall correctly, you called that an egregious statement.
Yes.
Did I hear that correctly?
Yes.
So if you take a look at page 36 of Exhibit J 354, and down at the bottom, there's a section, Roman numeral 10, substance use disorders and chronic opioid use. Subsection A is addiction. And then it goes on to B on the next page, physical dependence. C, tolerance. pseudo-addiction, correct?
Yes, sir.
So in this chapter of this book that you co-authored, each of those 4 concepts is separately described, correct?
Yes.
And on pseudo-addiction, it's described as number 1, appearance of drug-seeking behavior caused by unrecognized undertreatment of pain. You see that?
Yes.
And then it goes on, and in number 3, it says, well, let's do 2. Iatrogenically, I think I butchered that.
Iatrogenically.
Pardon?
Iatrogenically.
Iatrogenically induced by inadequate treatment of pain. And that's part of the description in this chapter you co-authored on what pseudo-addiction is, and this was in 2010, right?
Correct.
And then it says 3, providing sufficient dose of opioid for analgesia will abolish symptoms, correct?
That's what it says.
Okay. And this is what you're now saying is egregious. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, the reason I have this in my disclosures is because this is an example of the infiltration of pharmaceutical marketing into medical education. Dr. Christo was, I have the highest respect for him, but he was a paid consultant. He was a key opinion leader for opioids. So the content that came in here was given to us as residents. Whether or not we agreed with it, who am I as a resident to go up to my attending and say, sir, I don't agree with this, or what's the foundation of science? There's no citation to this. My point of including this is exactly that the influence was deep. It was very deep.
Sir, after this handbook was published, did you make any attempt to disclaim your role as a co-author?
No.
Sitting here today, have you made any effort to try to disclaim your role as a co-author?
No.
Indeed, is it mentioned in your CD?
It is.
So in the CD you prepared to provide to the court as to your qualifications as an expert in this matter, you actually included this handbook, correct?
Yes.
Without any disclaimer?
No.
Is that right?
That is right, because I think it's important for those of us who've made mistakes to atone to them.
Isn't it true? Well, strike that. Take a look at Exhibit J410. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Thank you, sir.
So I'd like you to turn to page 34. This is the 1968 FDA approved label for Duragesic. And the initial, pardon? Well, the initial approval of the opioid was 1968. Pardon? Yeah. If you take a look at page 60, 2009, that this label was adopted. But take a look at page 34, if you would.
Yes.
That's what I want to ask you about. So in the FDA-approved label, it says, drug-seeking behavior is very common in persons with substance use disorders. Do you see that?
Yes.
And that is a description of at least some of the behavior that you would attribute to pseudo-addiction, correct?
Yes.
And I guess just look at the same page there, that same section. That paragraph concludes with preoccupation with achieving adequate pain relief can be appropriate behavior in a patient with poor pain control, correct?
Correct.
Again, that is a description of behavior that you've labeled as pseudo-addiction, which you find to be egregious, correct?
No, sir. No, sir. That pseudo-addiction is a rationalization of drug-seeking behavior. If somebody has a preoccupation with adequate pain control, pseudo-addiction is not on the differential list. Figuring out why that patient is either preoccupied or has an opioid use disorder, or figuring out if the pain is actually undertreated and needs to be addressed, that's on the differential list. That's what we're, as clinicians, charged to figure out and understand. But pseudo-addiction is just a confusing cloud that makes it difficult to determine, is this patient having legitimate pain that needs to be addressed, which I advocate it should be, or is this patient having a mental health disorder that needs to be addressed, which I, again, advocate. But to cloud the picture with a new diagnosis that serves nobody any good is inappropriate.
I don't know that you're reading this the way it's written, Doctor. Do you have it in front of you still?
I'm still looking at it, sir, yes.
It's talking about drug-seeking behavior, correct?
Correct.
And it's talking about how this preoccupation can be appropriate behavior in a patient with what?
With poor pain control.
Thank you.
I'm not arguing that, sir.
There are checklists that have been developed by, among others, the CDC that provide guidance to physicians for the use of opioids to treat chronic pain, correct?
It's providing out-of-bound context, yes.
Okay, well, why don't we take a look at them? If we could look at Exhibit J, 348. If I may approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may. Okay.
Thank you.
So you're familiar with this checklist, correct?
Yes, sir.
And this is the CDC checklist for prescribing opioids for chronic pain?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, I'd move Exhibit 348 into evidence.
J348 will be admitted into the evidence. You may publish it if you like.
Thank you. Now, I believe in your deposition, you were asked if you agreed with these guidelines, and your testimony was that you consider them to be a step in the right direction,
I
correct?
do.
Okay. So let's take a look at them. They start out when considering long-term opioid therapy, talks about setting realistic goals for pain and function based on diagnosis, correct?
Yes,
And you agree with that, right?
I do.
And 2, check that non-opioid therapies tried and optimized. You agree with that, right?
I do.
3, discuss benefits and risks, addiction and overdose with the patient. You agree with that, right?
Yes.
4, evaluate the risk of harm or misuse. Discuss risk factors with patient. Check prescription drug monitoring program, PD&P data. Check urine drug screen. You agree with all of that, right?
Yes, sir.
then that's set criteria for stopping or continuing opioids. You agree with that?
Yes.
Assess baseline pain and function. Agree with that?
I agree with everything that's on this page.
And when was this published?
2016.
And this is available to physicians?
Yes.
And the CDC is an agency of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services?
Yes.
Now, is it true that there have been unintended consequences as a result of these CDC guidelines?
I'm unaware of that.
And let me have you look at Exhibit J 3799. If I may approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
This is a pain management best practices interagency task force report. It's the draft final report. And you'll see if you'll take a look at page 7. It lists the members of the task force, and one of the members is Daniel Claude. You see that?
Yes.
And you understand he's one of the state's experts in this case?
I don't know that.
Have you spoken to Dr. Claude in connection with arriving at your opinions that you've offered here?
No, I have not.
You read his deposition?
No, I haven't.
You seen the video of his deposition?
No.
Anyway, look at page 5, if you would. And are you aware that the task force... No. No, I haven't asked for it yet. I'm going to ask him if he has an understanding of something.
I don't think this is in evidence yet.
Not yet. We'll let him ask some questions before he moves for admission.
In connection with your forming opinions that you've offered here, or in connection with your work as a pain clinician, did you learn that the pain management best practices interagency task force concluded that there were unintended consequences that resulted from the CDC guidelines that we just went over?
Sir, it lists that, but it also doesn't list the unintended consequences of opioid overprescribing.
I just asked you if you learned something. Either you did or you didn't.
I didn't learn anything from that.
Okay. Did you review this report for purposes of arriving at the opinions that you've offered here?
No, I haven't.
Were you aware of the report?
Frankly, no, I was not.
Okay. Let me hand you document J3565. If I may approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
J3565 is an article by by Deborah Dow, Tamara Hagerich, and Roger Chu, C-H-O-U, in the New England Journal of Medicine. And my question is whether you reviewed and considered this article in arriving at the opinions that you've offered here?
No, I haven't.
You seen this article before?
No, I haven't.
Have you learned, either in the work you've done preparing for your opinions here, or in the work you do as a pain clinician, that the task force that came up with the CDC guidelines believed that some of the policies and practices derived from the guidelines have been inconsistent with and often go beyond its recommendations?
Your Honor, I object it's beyond the scope of direct examination. I will talk about the CDC and wait and see where it goes. Beyond the scope.
I'm entitled to probe what he's learned and what he's relying upon, Your Honor.
I'll overrule the objection.
I don't have that information, no.
Okay. Did you learn, either in connection with forming your opinions in this matter that you've offered here, or in connection with the work you've done as a pain clinician, that the task force believed that some of the inconsistencies included inflexible application of recommended dosage and duration thresholds?
Sir, I'm unaware of that, and if it says anything, it's how much lack of knowledge and education there is in this field.
So you think the task force is also influenced by this misinformation campaign?
I can't derive an opinion on that.
You'd be speculating, right?
Is that a question?
Yes.
I would be speculating.
You'd be speculating if you were going to opine that the FDA was influenced by this misinformation campaign that you've testified about, correct?
Objection on regulatory issues. We've not asked him a single thing about the FDA on direct examination. We've talked about this multiple times, and it's just improper when we keep asking questions about whether the FDA, this whole line of questions, same objection on the regulatory.
Now, I'm also out on another ground, we have motions to dismiss on this that Mr. Yoder was around for. If they want to have a trial somewhere else about how they lied to the federal government, we've made it very clear that we were not going into those matters. They have tried over and over and over to make this that issue. We have always said it's not that for us. I think we have to deal with that. We've said it throughout this case, and they have lost multiple times on that issue.
Mr. Brody?
If I may, Your Honor, no, I don't know that we have to approach. There's nothing that the witness can't hear.
Go ahead.
Just to respond to Mr. Beckworth, ruling at the motion to dismiss stage of a case that the entire case, 6, 7 claims, whatever it was that were being asserted at that time, is not preempted on the pleadings is very different than getting into a trial setting where eliciting evidence that positions being taken by the state of Oklahoma would impose liability for conduct that is specifically permitted by FDA based on what is clearly a witness's disagreement with approved indications in the FDA label. That record is something that we need to make. And so, FDA evidence of what FDA did, evidence of what government bodies did, is directly relevant to that question, no matter what the ruling has been on a motion to dismiss at the pleading stage. We're at the stage now where we're down to 1 claim. The court is going to have to decide, what is the court going to decide this case on? If the court were to decide the case for the state, what is the basis for liability? And that defense is still in the case. That's an affirmative defense that has been pled by the defendants who are here, and we're entitled to where a witness offers testimony that directly contradicts with activity that has been permitted by FDA and is being offered as a basis to impose liability based on that activity. We're entitled to explore it, notwithstanding the fact that when a witness comes in and offers opinions that have been contradicted or disagreed with by government agencies, whether it's CDC, FDA, other parts of HHS, world government bodies, whatever the case is, that goes directly to the credibility of that witness's opinions and speaks to whether that witness is an outlier, well outside of mainstream medical thinking. But I felt I had to come up and address. I was here at the motion to dismiss hearing in December of 2017. I remember that argument, and ruling on a preemption at the pleading stage is very different than getting to a trial setting where evidence is being offered in a case where there is a preemption affirmative defense still in the case. The court is going to have to rule on at the conclusion of trial.
Our immediate approach.
Let me approach.
Yes, why don't you come on up, gentlemen?
1 minute, Your Honor. So, yeah, my question, Doctor, you with us?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, my question was, is it true, too, that you would be speculating if you were going to opine that the FDA was influenced by this misinformation campaign that you have testified about?
I don't know.
And it's also true that you would be speculating in offering opinions that there are physicians who are influenced to write improper prescriptions based upon this misinformation campaign that you testified to, correct?
No, sir. No, sir, because that's verbatim what physicians in this state told me.
Isn't it true, doctor, that even you acknowledged that you would be speculating to say if you were influenced by what you call this misinformation campaign?
No, there's no speculation. I was influenced by this misinformation. That's why I'd like to bring attention to the chapter in the textbook that I wrote with misinformation that was permeated by pharmaceutical campaigning like Johnson & Johnson did.
So let me have you turn to your deposition, sir. Do you have it still in front of you? And I'd like you to turn to page 187. Starting at line 25 through page 188, line 9. And when you were deposed in this case, you were under oath, correct?
Yes, sir.
You realized you were under oath, right?
Yes, sir.
And you realized it was an important proceeding where you were going to come forth and testify and disclose to the defendants your opinions in this case, right?
Yes.
As well as the grounds for your opinions, correct?
Yes.
And one of the opinions that you showed up with was this notion that this misinformation campaign that you talked about influenced the prescription of opioid drugs, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you had a chance, did you review your transcript after you
Yes.
gave it? And you had a chance to make corrections?
In what way?
In whatever way counsel that you make corrections, right? Did you make any corrections?
I was unaware that I could make corrections.
Okay. And is it true, looking at page 187, line 24, to 188, line 9, that you were asked this question and you gave the following answer? Question. I want to try asking my question again, doctor. Have you personally been swayed by a pharmaceutical rep's discussions with you to prescribe an opioid, which in retrospect you believe was not in your patient's best interest? Answer, I don't know how you would characterize that. How would you know if you would have made a different decision if you hadn't heard something? I think that's very speculative. It would be very, very hard for me to answer that question. That was your testimony, correct?
Yes.
So, you testified earlier that in making a decision about a prescription for a patient, you consider a number of different sources of information, right?
Correct.
And one of the sources of information that you consider would be medical literature, correct?
Yes.
Including publications.
I think he just kind of made the point for me, but I object to the use of deposition testimony. It's not going to be for impeachment purposes. That question read in the deposition was about a sales rep, and he testified more broadly than that. So I object to improper impeachment testimony.
Unless I'm missing something, Your Honor, he's tried to characterize visits by sales reps as part of this misinformation campaign.
Certainly, he can use the deposition testimony for impeachment purposes, but other than that, I'll restrict its use.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, were you here when Dr. Rojas testified?
No, sir, I wasn't.
Have you read his testimony?
No, I haven't.
Have you been told that he testified that he believed that opioids effectively treated acute and chronic pain?
I wasn't here for that.
Do you think he's been influenced by this misinformation campaign?
I don't know what his influences were. Clearly, at the time of the deposition, I wasn't sure what my influences were. But at least I'm humble to come out and say that.
I'm just asking you now about Dr. Rojas, okay? I'm not asking you about you. We've already talked about
Sure.
you. Now let's talk about Dr. Rojas, okay?
Sorry.
And do you believe that he was influenced by this misinformation campaign that you've testified about?
I have no way of knowing that.
What about Dr. Portnoy?
I don't know. I haven't spoken to those individuals, but certainly the Oklahoma physicians with whom I've spoken
Your Honor,
admit
I'd
to
move
that.
to strike the response,
I will-
other than he hadn't spoken to Dr. Portnoy.
He's just got to explain. It's more nuanced than this, he knows.
I'll strike the response.
Thank you. So, among the things you consider when you're making this individual determination as a treating physician, as a pain clinician, as to what treatment to direct your patient, what prescriptions, what drugs to prescribe, one of the things you do is you stay current in medical literature, correct?
More than just drugs. All of the modalities that I employ in my clinic. Yes, I stay up to date with literature.
Okay. It's one of the things that you consider, correct?
Yes.
And you consider the literature, among other reasons, so that you're familiar with the risk and benefits of a medication, correct?
Yes, I read the literature thoroughly to decide if the methodology utilized was unbiased enough to make a conclusion that I agree with or disagree with.
And in doing so, would you agree that you're able to make your own determination of the risks and benefits of a particular drug that you're prescribing for your patient?
With the extensive background that I have in pharmacology and anesthesiology and the impact of these medications and the biomechanics of pain and injury, yes, I believe that I am qualified to make that determination.
And is what you're saying that you think other doctors aren't as capable as you of doing that?
I think other physicians who haven't had my training, just as I haven't had their training in, say, internal medicine or cardiology, would be able to, the challenges are the same. If I don't have the background to make a determination in cardiology or internal medicine, then if I read a study, I'm not going to be capable, I'm not going to have the skill set to understand if there's bias in there, if there's a methodology that would be able to be interpreted into results.
I think you misunderstood my question. I'm not talking about cardiology, diabetes. We're talking about pain. We're talking about the prescription of opioids, okay? Already established, for a doctor to prescribe an opioid, they have to be registered with the DEA because it's a Schedule II drug. You understand that, correct?
Yes.
So there's a limited subset of doctors who are allowed by law to write prescriptions for opioids, correct?
Sir, almost every physician has a DEA license.
And if they do, they understand it's a Schedule II drug, right?
I can't make the presumption of what they understand or not.
You can't speculate as to what's going through their mind, can
Yes.
you? Correct?
Correct.
So let me have you look at a document that will mark as next in order, if we could, Your Honor.
Yes.
I don't know what number that is.
Well, we have a series of these HHS and other materials, we can either mark them individually as court exhibits or as a packet since they were introduced at the same time. I don't know what the defendant's preference is.
I think individually, Your Honor,
So-
and maybe at the break we can catch up on those. I think many of what I've referred to have been marked as the actual exhibits. Some of them we haven't moved into evidence yet, so they're on the record but haven't been admitted. There are a few that I've questioned the doctor about that weren't marked as exhibits. Those I think we can mark as court exhibits.
And that's what I was talking about. Is this
Right.
next one going to be a court exhibit?
This one
or-
should be a regular exhibit.
Okay, well, we'll talk about court exhibits later. Yeah, go ahead.
And if I may approach?
Yes. This one, are you ever gonna move that, or are you gonna take it back?
Thank you.
And so this one doesn't have a exhibit number, so do we want?
so if I can inquire what number?
Well, no, I think he's wanting it as a regular exhibit.
I am told 3927.
And that's not gonna be repetitive of something else?
I
J 3927. Does the state have any objections?
So you're going into, this is in your side.
This was something the doctor mentioned this morning in his testimony. Right, doctor?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I hope I can cross-examine you.
States, I'm sorry, not states. Jansen 3927 will be admitted into the evidence.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Yes.
May we publish?
Yes, you may.
So Dr. Maslamduz, you mentioned this morning a poster or some type of research project you were involved with involving transdermal fentanyl patches, correct?
I don't remember in what context I mentioned that.
Remember, it came up this morning, right?
I've done research on this, but I don't remember where I brought it up, if I brought it up. I may have misspoke earlier.
Okay, well, in any event, Exhibit J3927 is what's called a poster presentation of a research project that you were involved in, correct?
Yes, and Johnson & Johnson sponsored.
Okay. Did they tell you what to say in this?
They did not.
So if you take a look at this, American Pain Society 27th Annual Scientific Meeting, May 8 to 10, 2008. And this meeting apparently took place in Florida, correct?
I don't recall.
Don't recall?
I don't see where it is.
Anyway, you were one of the researchers for this particular project, correct?
Yes.
And you were doing that while you were at your residency at Johns Hopkins?
Yes, sir.
And the research was focusing on sleep disorders, correct?
Yes.
And how pain impacted sleep, right?
Yes.
And in particular, you were studying whether the transdermal fentanyl patch might actually help with sleep disorders caused by pain, right?
Yes.
And this poster, just in terms of what a poster presentation is, they're conferences that are attended by members and others who are interested in the subject of the conference, correct?
Yes.
Happens in the medical profession, right?
Yes.
And researchers might give actual presentations to large groups, right?
Yes.
But they also might just have what's called a poster presentation, where they have a poster out in the lobby for others to come and review and then ask questions about, right?
Yes.
And this is one of those poster presentations.
It is.
Okay. So if you take a look at this, and this was 2008, right?
Yes.
So if we start out in background, you start out with the hypothesis here the association between chronic pain and sleep disorders is well established. Agree with
Yes.
that?
Yes.
So a sleep disorder is one of the problems that can be caused by untreated chronic pain, right?
Yes.
Then it goes on, studies indicate that painful stimuli arouse, delay, and diminish the quality of sleep. Sleep deprivation and disruption in itself may also elicit hyperalgesia and hypersensitization to external stimuli. The establishment of this vicious cycle in chronic pain may perpetuate the disorder and its comorbidities, correct?
Correct.
So you did some research, some testing to try to evaluate that, right?
I did.
And the testing under methods, apparently there were 40 patients who were part of this study, and the transdermal fentanyl patches were titrated to effect over a 6 weeks period. You measured it. I don't know that we need to go into the details, but were you administering these fentanyl patches off-label?
I was not involved in the methodology. I was involved in the statistical analysis.
Okay. Were they being administered off-label?
No, I don't think so.
So, based on the data, you were comparing sleep patterns in patients who experienced a 50% improvement in the pain score, correct?
Right.
Okay. And so you concluded here, if you look down at the bottom, patients who have relief of chronic neuropathic pain treated with transdermal fentanyl have an improvement in sleep quality as measured by, and I'll let you pronounce that, actigraphy. Actigraphy may be a useful tool to study sleep disturbances in chronic pain patients and examine the effects of pain therapies on sleep. So that was the conclusion, correct?
Yes.
And in your CV that you presented in this case, you actually list this poster presentation as one of your publications, correct?
Yes. Well, not as my publication, as a poster. The reason it didn't go on to be a publication is because we had questions as to whether... So
CV.
the way actigraphy works is that it's just an accelerometer. It's showing movement while somebody's asleep. And whether that's a reflection of good quality sleep or not is questionable. Are we sedating that patient to the point where they're not mobile during sleep, or is it actually a reflection of better sleep? For that reason, it remained a poster, and it didn't become a publication. I chose not to proceed with that.
Let me approach if I might, Your Honor.
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
So I've handed you what's been marked as Exhibit J345, and this is your CV, correct?
Yes.
And I just want you to take a look at page 3. The third item down is a reference to this particular poster, correct, that we've marked as Exhibit J3927?
Correct.
Is there any disclaimer when you list this poster as something you've done on your CV?
Sir, if I were to do that for every single one of these, the CV would be volumes thick.
I'm just asking on this one, is there any indication of a disclaimer?
No, I take pride in everything that I've worked on.
And this is a list of posters, of contributors, of projects, of publications that you were listing as a basis for showing your qualifications as an expert in this very case, right?
Yes.
Now, you testified that you looked at some Oklahoma data.
Mr. Yoder, did you want to move admission of 348?
Yes.
345, excuse me.
Yeah, I don't know that it needs to come in, to be honest, Your Honor.
We'd like to come in.
I have no problem with it coming in.
J345 will be admitted into the evidence.
So you testified that you looked at certain Oklahoma data in reaching your opinions that you've offered here, is that right?
Yes.
And did you look at Oklahoma data concerning unintentional poisoning deaths in the state?
Yes.
It's one of the documents you looked at?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, let me have you take a look at Exhibit S-2400. Can I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
So Exhibit S-2400 is a report, Fatal Unintentional Poisoning Surveillance System Data Update by Claire Nguyen, MS, Injury Prevention Service, Oklahoma State Department of Health. And is this one of the items of data that you reviewed from the state of Oklahoma?
Yes,
And
it is.
It is? Okay. I move Exhibit S-2400 into evidence, Your Honor.
No objection.
S 2400 will be admitted into the evidence.
It's already in evidence.
Thank you.
So if you take a look at page 3, you understand then that the data being presented here addresses deaths in the state of Oklahoma involving prescription drugs, illicit drugs, or alcohol by year of death, which they call unintentional poisoning. And this covers the years 2007 to 2016, correct?
Yes.
And if you flip back to page 2, talks about all incoming ME reports. You know what those are?
Medical examiner.
And then it says include manner, accident, poisoning and cause of death, OK resident. And then it goes on to say exclude. Do you see that?
Yes.
And one of the exclusions is correct drugs, properly administered, correct dose. You see that?
I do.
So it's your understanding that this data that you reviewed as part of your work in this matter actually excludes the proper and lawful prescription of opioids.
Mischaracterized the document.
Sustained.
I'm asking for his understanding here. I can rephrase it to make
Please
it more
do.
clear. So is it your understanding, Doctor, that the data that's presented in this report excludes deaths resulting from the properly administered correct dose of lawfully prescribed opioids?
Yes, it's excluding the people who overdosed despite having been prescribed their medications.
So have you made any effort to try to determine what number of Oklahoma residents, let me just make sure I get the language right, overdosed on Duragesic having been prescribed that medication?
I wouldn't have a way of determining that, but there is a graph that shows the number of people who did overdose on fentanyl.
Just asking about Duragesic right now. So just answer my questions if you would, and try not to jump ahead, okay? Do you have any data, right?
Go a little while. Object to the instructions that he's giving the witness. Each time he doesn't like the answer that the witness gives. More than welcome to ask questions. We'll object to the instructions preceding the question. Or object.
Your Honor, if he would give me straight answers, I wouldn't need to do it.
Overruled.
So my question is very specific, Doctor, okay? Do you have any data that would show the number of Oklahoma residents who overdosed on Duragesic having been prescribed, lawfully prescribed that drug.
No,
Do you have any such data for New Senta?
no,
Do you have any such data for New Senta ER?
no.
So let's go back to the report and let's look at page 4, if we would. You have that?
Yes,
So again, this is data that you considered for purposes of arriving at your opinions, right?
yes,
And you'll see that from 2007 to 2013, the deaths from opioids, which is the yellow line, correct,
yes,
stays pretty stable, right?
yes.
Not really going up, is it?
I mean, yeah, no, it's not.
And then starting in 2014, the deaths, the unintentional deaths from opioids that weren't properly prescribed, goes down, correct?
Correct.
Goes down in 2015, right?
Yes,
Goes down in 2016, right?
yes.
You know what happened in 2017?
No, I don't.
We'll look at that in a bit. You'll also see, if you go back to the next page, I'm sorry, the prior page. Yeah, sorry, Janice. Usually do a good job anticipating. That was my fault. Now here, the category that would include opioids would be prescription drugs, right?
Yes,
And again, you see pretty level from 2007 to 2013,
yes,
and then a dip down in 2014, right?
yes,
And then sort of leveling off 2016, right?
same as 15, yes.
Okay, do you know what it did in 2017?
No,
Look at that. But I see here methamphetamine, which is the red line, right? Correct?
correct.
It starts going up 2009, 2010, right?
Yes,
And it's continued to go up through 2016, right?
yes, reflecting the increase in substance abuse in our communities.
So, are you aware that there's more recent information from the state of Oklahoma that would show this data?
I'm unaware of that.
If you knew it was available, would you want to look at it?
I would.
Okay, let's look at it.
Mr. Yoder, why don't we go ahead and take a break now? It's,
Thanks, Your Honor.
about 3:10. Let's go ahead and take a break until 3:30. All right?
of methamphetamine-related overdose death increased by 600%. You see that?
Yes.
And do you have any reason to dispute that calculation, the 600% calculation?
No.
They also make the comment then, to the right, curbing the current drug epidemic and making real change will take more than addressing one particular substance or drug class. And
I'm so glad you mentioned that line.
just asking you yes or no, you would agree with that, wouldn't you?
Yes, and it's important because substance abuse is not contingent on one substance. But once it's introduced, the patient who does have an addiction is prone to multiple substances of abuse. And even when the supply of opioids is reduced by the efforts of public health workers, patients who have a substance abuse dependency or substance dependency are going to find or going to look for other substances. This is not a scourge, this is not a problem isolated to just opioids. It's the introduction of substance dependency and abuse that's the problem. And that was perpetrated by Johnson & Johnson.
Your Honor, I'd move to strike everything other than yes as non-responsive.
Your Honor, object to the motion to strike.
The perpetrated by Johnson & Johnson, Your Honor.
I
is-
will strike the last line with the reference to Johnson & Johnson. And again, I would remind witness, he'll get a chance.
I'm sure Mr. Duck will follow up with some questions where you can answer more than yes or no.
Yes, sir.
You ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you consider yourself to be a marketing expert?
No.
You had any specialized education in pharmaceutical marketing
I had education in general marketing.
as an undergraduate in business school, correct? If you look at your CV, it's Exhibit 345. It's in here someplace. 345. Do you have that in front of you? I know
Yes,
we've
I
been
do.
looking at it. Great. So again, this is the CV that you prepared to set forth what you consider to be your qualifications for offering opinions in this case, right?
Yes.
And if you look at education, you list undergrad, medical school, internship, residency, fellowship. You do say you had a management BS with a chemistry minor at Case Western. It doesn't say anything about marketing, does it?
No, but as a business major, you take marketing classes.
Back in late 90s, early 2000s, right?
Yes, early enough to be conscious of marketing influences on the education that I receive as a medical student, resident, etc.
Then you take a look at the research that you list, starting on page 2.
Yes.
Presentations you list, starting on page 4.
Yes.
Do any of those articles specifically address pharmaceutical marketing?
No.
In connection with arriving at the opinions you'd offered here, did you make any effort to try to determine the number of prescriptions written for Duragesic in the state of Oklahoma?
No, sir, but...
Same. You've answered my question, thank you. Same for Senta.
No, sir.
Same for Senta ER.
No.
Did you make any effort to compare the number of prescriptions of Duragesic, Senta ER in Oklahoma compared to prescriptions of opioids manufactured by other companies?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. As part of your work in reaching your opinions that you've offered here, did you make any effort to try to determine, to compare the number of prescriptions written in Oklahoma for Duragesic, Senta ER compared to prescriptions of opioids manufactured by other companies?
Yes, I had some, I don't have specific numbers, but I vaguely know that the quantity of prescriptions for, say, fentanyl was disproportionately higher in terms of number of overdoses than how many prescriptions were prescribed in comparison to other opioids that were also prescribed.
I'm just asking about prescriptions right now.
Correct, and on
Total prescriptions.
total prescriptions, there were fewer prescriptions of fentanyl, but higher numbers of overdoses by comparison.
I'm just asking about prescriptions. right
Sure,
now, Okay?
and I'm answering, I'm sorry.
So did you make any effort to compare the number of prescriptions for Duragesic, Senta, and Senta ER in Oklahoma compared to prescriptions for opioids manufactured by other drug companies?
Yes,
Okay.
and the proportion, I can tell you that I looked at the proportion of
I'm
them.
not asking about proportion, I'm asking about total prescriptions.
Well, the reason I'm saying that is because I don't remember the specific numbers, but I do remember the relative ratios.
Well, I understand why you want to talk about proportions. I'm asking about total volume and whether you made an effort to specifically look at how many prescriptions were written for Duragesic, Senta ER in Oklahoma compared to opioids manufactured by other companies.
Yes,
Okay? And did you see what the most prescribed opioid was in Oklahoma?
I don't need to, it's going to be hydrocodone. It was across the country.
And what about hydrocodone?
That's what I said, hydrocodone.
What about oxycodone?
Oxycodone would likely be up there too.
When you were talking about fentanyl a while ago, and when you were kind of offering up your testimony about proportion, fentanyl isn't the same thing as Duragesic, correct?
No, it is. Fentanyl is the active ingredient in Duragesic.
But fentanyl is in other drugs as well, correct?
Not that I'm aware of.
No? And-
Maybe the short-acting fentanyl, but I think that the proportion of prescriptions for those is very small, considering that their indication is for cancer only, not for general pain.
So tell me, doctor, how many Duragesic prescriptions were written in Oklahoma in 2004?
Sir, like I said, I don't remember the specific numbers, I just remember proportions.
In forming your opinions that you've offered here in this case, did you review the testimony from the Oklahoma medical examiner?
No, I did not.
Did you make any effort to determine whether the state of Oklahoma distinguishes between legal or illicit fentanyl?
Whether or not it does, the
I'm just
present-
asking you whether you made that effort. I know there's probably some explanation you'd like to give, doctor, but just answer my question.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. Did you make any effort to determine, in arriving at the opinions you've offered here, whether the state of Oklahoma distinguishes, for purposes of its data, between legal or illicit fentanyl?
I don't know.
Thank you.
But I can say
You
that
answered
illicit fentanyl was not present.
You've answered my question. Thank you. In arriving at the opinions that you've offered here in court regarding this misinformation campaign, and you've described it as a marketing campaign, correct?
No, I think it's an influential campaign. I can't specify that it's marketing, because if somebody gets up and talks about an opioid in a continuing medical education environment, I can't say that's specifically marketing, but that's definitely influencing.
Let's not quibble over words, okay?
I think it's important to
No, there's-
distinguish those two.
I understand, there's been a lot of quibbling about words. Let's talk about concepts so we know we're all on the same playing field, okay?
Sure.
What you're saying here, let's be clear, is that pain clinicians and others who were authorized to prescribe opioids were influenced in order to overprescribe opioids, right?
General practitioners and the whole field of medicine was influenced to prescribe more opioids, correct?
But that's what you're focusing on. The influence is the influence in writing prescriptions of opioids, right?
Yes.
Okay, now whether you call that influence marketing or something else, right? You're talking about the decision being made by an individual physician whether to write out a prescription, correct?
Yes, I only make the distinction because you are harping on how little information I have about marketing. The influence was very prevalent, yes.
I don't know if I'm harping, I'm just asking questions. It's my job, trying to ferret out the basis of the opinions that you're offering.
Sure,
So, let me keep ferreting, okay?
by all means.
In reaching your opinions as to how physicians who are authorized to write opioid prescriptions were influenced by this campaign, whether you call it marketing or not, did you consider what information was provided to those physicians regarding the FDA-approved product label for those drugs?
Sir, I'm not an FDA expert, and you keep coming back to that issue. The only thing I can testify about is where the science was misrepresented, where the science was omitted, which I believe is just as bad as lying about it, and where the science was just simply manipulated from its conception to its execution and delivery.
We know that's what you want to say. It's not answering my question. Let me try again. I'm going to keep asking it until I get an answer. In arriving at your opinions about how physicians who are authorized to prescribe opioids were influenced by this campaign that you've talked about, did you consider what information was available to these physicians regarding the FDA-approved product label for the drugs?
Again, as far as the FDA goes, I have no comment to say. I don't know.
Did you
I
consider
don't
that?
know.
Did you consider that?
No.
Did you bother taking, you know what the physician desk reference is?
Yes.
It's something that's available to physicians?
It's a thick volume about this thick, which has all of those drug label informations, which if I can find the fentanyl one, you can see how thick it is for just one medication, let alone the entire pharmacopoeia of available medications.
But the physician's desk reference is a book, a fair statement book. It's big. Is it on the web now too?
It's a reference manual, is what I would call it.
Reference manual that's available to any physician to look before they prescribe a drug to see the FDA product label for that drug, right?
Yes, sir. It's the equivalent of all the legalese that we go through every time we download a new application or app on our phone. People don't read those things. It's positioned in a way with as much wordage as there is in there that physicians really don't put a lot of attention to that. They put more attention to the content that they're absorbing through conferences, through colleague interactions, through patient discussions, through referrals to other specialists. All of that was part of that viral execution of misinformation.
We're going to talk to others about whether they bother to look at the FDA-approved product label before they prescribe, or others do. But right now I'm talking about you.
Sure.
So in reaching your opinions that you offered here in court, did you consult with the physician desk reference to see what the FDA-approved product labels were for Duragesic, Senta, and Senta ER?
Sir, I didn't refer to the physician desk reference, but I did read the drug inserts for fentanyl and the other medications.
Do you tell your patients when you're prescribing an opioid for them that you don't bother to consult with the approved FDA product label?
Overruled.
Sir, I go through the risks and benefits of the medications based on my training and education and literature review, of which I have reviewed a substantial amount that indicates the long-term evidence for opioids, specifically long-acting opioids, is non-existent. So yes, I do refer to the literature that I've read, and I discuss with patients the concerns that I have about the medications they're getting prescriptions for.
Does that include the FDA-approved product label?
Again, as a physician, I don't refer to the FDA drug inserts as much as you think that we do. And if it was really that important, well, why doesn't Johnson & Johnson put that as the first slide in their presentations? Why don't they break it down into bullet points and put pretty pictures next to it so that when we're seeing it, it stands out as these are the most relevant, critical takeaway points from this conversation?
Doctor, you're arguing with me again. Yeah. Answer my questions if you would, please. Do you tell your patients when you're prescribing an opioid to them that you're not consulting the FDA-approved product label?
No, frankly, it would confuse them to even discuss the content of the FDA label, just as how most physicians don't understand the pharmacology that was presented in the fentanyl drug insert.
So you would agree that Duragesic, Senta ER are Schedule II opioids, correct?
Yes, they are.
And you would agree that a Schedule II opioid carries the highest risk of abuse, correct?
Yes, they're not to be taken lightly or to be promoted in a way that takes them lightly.
So, just one moment, Your Honor.
Yes.
So, I apologize for that, Doctor. To be clear, is it true that you do not base your decision to prescribe an opioid on the FDA-approved product label?
Question has been asked and answered. I sustain the objection.
I'm not sure how clear the answer was, Your Honor, so that's why I'd asked, but I'll move on. Is it true that in your view, the FDA-approved product label is more of a pharmacy-type content?
Frankly, sir, yes. When I was training, nobody ever pulled it out. And if it was such a relevant, such an important piece of information, why was it never presented to me by any drug representative? It was always in the packets that they would include. But nobody ever took it out and unfolded this piece of paper, reviewed it with me and said, look at this specific black box warning. Why was it never presented in a conference or a CME that, folks, we got to open this up and take a look at it? It was always...
Doctor, I'm going to stop you there. If he's going to ask me to strike it, I'm not going to strike it. But again, you'll have an opportunity to answer more than yes or no.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Doug.
So if you would, just answer my question. You, Dr. Mazloum Doust, consider the FDA-approved product label to be more for pharmacies than for treating physicians? Yes or no?
No. I thought that it was more of a pharmacy-driven thing. I see that it is a value or has value.
Your Honor, I would ask the Flagg's deposition.
Objection, we've been using a procedure that was out earlier, fairly well today. We asked you to talk to people.
Before we play, I'd ask you to ask him to read back his deposition testimony, and if that
Sure.
doesn't clear it up, entertain any questions.
If you look at page 217, starting at line 17, going through page 218, line 8, were you asked the following question and did you give the following answer? Question. Can you understand that this document contains the full prescribing information as approved by the Food and Drug Administration for this drug? Answer. Yeah. So I'm not sure where you're going with this line of questioning. My concern isn't with the package inserts or what they reflect or what utility they have, because frankly, as a clinician, I'm aware of these. We don't go into detail of these. Like I said, we assume that this is a pharmaceutical, pharmacy type of content. We understand that medications have contraindications. We understand that they have utilization. But when we base our decisions, we're not referencing these. That was your testimony, correct?
Object to improper repeat of this.
I would ask that the witness be allowed to answer the question based on his testimony.
That was your testimony, correct?
Yes, that is my testimony, and frankly, the
Counsel?
amount of time we've talked about the FDA black box warning exceeds by tenfold how many times it's ever been expressed to me or exposed to me in any kind of other outreach by Johnson & Johnson or their representatives.
You learned about black box when you were in medical school, weren't you?
Frankly, I'll be honest, no, I don't remember.
Really? So you think a drug company has to tell a treating physician that a Schedule II drug has a black box in order to pay attention to it?
I believe that if there's a black box warning, a pharmaceutical representative is obligated to make it known to the physician that they're representing, they're discussing.
Have you reviewed all of the Janssen promotional materials for Duragesic, Nucenta, and Nucenta ER that have been marked as exhibits in this case?
No, but I've reviewed enough to know that bias is in there.
Not my question.
I answered it, no, I haven't.
Thank you. That's an answer to my question. And did you see in the product literature for Duragesic, for Nucenta and Nucenta ER, that it specifically referenced the FDA product label?
Yes, I noticed the disproportionate expression of other content versus the FDA warning label.
You have a way of always going somewhere else with a question I'm asking.
But I still answered the question.
I'm not asking you to argue. I'm just asking you to answer my question. Do you agree that the product literature that you reviewed, Duragesic, Nucenta, and Nucenta ER, made specific reference to the FDA-approved product label for those drugs?
Yes, there's enough of that information for you to be able to stand behind the fact that you presented it, but the disproportionate response is not represented.
You ever worked for a pharmaceutical company?
Do I have a word for it?
Have you ever worked for one?
No, I haven't.
You ever made decisions about what goes into marketing materials for a pharmaceutical company?
No, sir, I'm a physician.
But you think you're an expert on that, right?
No, I'm an expert on the influence.
Sustained.
So you testified about something called a REMS program.
Yes,
And if I understood your testimony correctly, you don't think much about them. Is that
I
right?
think there's a bias to it, yes.
Okay. And it's risk evaluation mitigation strategies?
Yes,
And part of a REMS program is educational, right?
it's educational with the intention of trying to produce a judicious approach to managing opioids, but it tends to be leaning towards a encouragement of opioid administration.
Doctor, if I asked you if it was raining outside, would you try to work in that there's a campaign of misinformation going on?
Sir, I'm just trying to be as honest as my observations are and try to be as specific to what I've observed.
You enrolled in a REMS program called TIRF REMS, correct?
Correct, I spoke on that. That's the one that I was referencing where the juxtaposition of two patients was biased towards an inappropriate utilization of opioids, and that the global encouragement of that program was long-acting opioids are a safer product than short-acting opioids, which
Sir,
the CDC
all I asked you
is.
is whether you enrolled in it. That's all I asked.
I spoke on, I even lectured it.
Did you enroll in it?
As a lecturer, I don't think you enroll in it, you present it.
Okay, if I could have you look at your deposition again, page 295. This is page 295, line 20 through line 22. And were you asked the following question, and did you give the following answer?
Yes, perhaps I.
Sorry, let
Yes.
me read it. And all I'm asking is, did you give that answer? If you and your counsel think you should explain it, you can do that later.
Yes, sir.
Now's not the time. Okay, let me go. Question. Okay, and you've been enrolled in TIRF REMS. Answer, yes, ma'am. Was that your testimony?
Yes.
Was that truthful testimony?
It's hard for me to say. I don't remember if by speaking on the topic, I was also an enrollee.
Okay, let me hand you an exhibit, J2441. It's a big one. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may. Is that?
Thank you.
So you see, this is the transmucosal immediate release fentanyl TIRF risk evaluation and mitigation strategy, REMS. You'll see that it reflects an initial REMS approval of December 20, 2011, with a most recent modification, December 2014. And what I want you to look at is page 2, if you would. And it says, healthcare providers who prescribe TIRF medicines for outpatient use are specially certified. And to be clear, what are the TIRF medicines?
The transmucosal intermediate release fentanyl.
Does that include Duragesic?
Well, in the last section of that presentation, it goes through all of the long-acting opioids by both brand name and generic name. So yes, it does include it.
Transmucosal immediate release fentanyl.
I'm talking about the program, the REMS
I'm
program.
talking about this particular REMS program.
Yes, that's the one I'm talking about.
TIRF.
Yes.
Okay?
In the last section of that, there's content.
So if you look again at page 2, it says, to become certified to prescribe TIRF medicines, prescribers will be required to enroll in the TIRF REMS Access Program. Prescribers must complete the following requirements to be enrolled. And the first requirement is review the TIRF REMS Access Education Materials, TIRF REMS Access Education Program, including the full prescribing information for each TIRF medicine. Correct?
Correct.
And the full prescribing information would include the FDA-approved product label, correct?
Yes.
And you did that when you enrolled in the TIRF REMS, right?
I did.
Now, did you ever enroll In the REMS program for Senta ER,
I don't recall.
are you enrolled in a REMS program currently?
I don't recall.
Take a look at Exhibit J 2148 and let me hand that to you. Is this in there? May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Thank you.
So this is a document entitled Extended Release and Long-Acting Opioid Analgesics, Risk Evaluation and Mitigation Strategy, REMS, supporting document. And if you well, have you ever seen this document before?
I don't know if I've seen this document, but looking at the title of this and the last REMS program that you gave me, I think I misspoke, that it was the extended release and long-acting REMS that I actually lectured on. So I would imagine that I probably was enrolled in the TERF REMS when I was a fellow at MD Anderson, but I haven't used those medications in a long time. But I'd be happy to talk to you more about the long-acting opioid REMS program, in which fentanyl was listed at.
So if I understand your testimony correctly, you believe you did enroll in the REMS for extended release and long-acting opioid analgesics.
Yes, to correct the record, I believe this was the one that I was lecturing on.
Okay. So if you look at, Your Honor, I'd move Exhibit J 2148 into evidence.
No objection.
J 2148 will be admitted into the evidence.
So this REMS covers FDA-approved extended release and long-acting opioids, correct?
Correct.
And you'll see that there are a number of companies that are listed among those who were involved in the preparation of this material, correct?
Yes, and I think the bias was reflected in the content.
I didn't ask you that, sir. I know, I'll say that, but just they're listed here, right?
They are.
And do you know when this was approved by the FDA?
No, I don't.
Is it your understanding it was approved by the FDA?
I assume so.
Okay. So in reaching your opinions that you've offered here in court, did you consider the information that's made available to physicians about extended release and long-acting opioids in the FDA-approved REMS?
Sorry. Can you ask the question one more time?
Sure. In arriving at your opinions, did you consider the information that's made available to physicians about extended release and long-acting opioids in the FDA-approved REMS?
So I can't really speculate on how the FDA went through this and approved the content or what they did.
I'm not asking you that, sir. Listen to my question.
Sure.
You're here offering your opinions, right?
Yes.
You know what you considered in reaching your opinions, right?
Yes.
I don't unless I ask a question and I get an answer. That's what I'm trying to do, okay? In arriving at your opinions that you've offered here in court, did you consider the information that's made available to physicians about extended release, long-acting opioids in the FDA-approved REMS?
Objection. We discussed this issue about the regulatory. I think the problem that we have here is putting that into question every time. And Dr. Mazzoon just doesn't understand the FDA process. So it's difficult to have a yes or no question that Mr. Yoder wants.
Respectfully, I'm not asking about the process, Your Honor. I'm asking whether he considered something. This is information that's available that physicians have to certify that they've read. He's saying they've been influenced by misinformation that's caused them to make decisions. And I'm asking him, did he consider this? He could say, yes, I did, or no, he
I
didn't.
will overrule the objection.
Thank you.
So frankly, I wasn't even aware that the FDA was involved in that REMS program. It's just that when somebody asked me to speak on the content and I saw the bias in the program, that's when I wanted to actually speak on it so I could clarify to my colleagues how there is bias in it.
Your Honor, I would move to strike everything after, frankly, I wasn't aware that the FDA was involved.
I will deny the request. Mr. Yoder, you had previously referred to J2441. Do you want to move admission of that exhibit?
Yes, Your Honor.
No objection.
We'll admit J2441 into the evidence.
So are you aware of the fact that before the FDA approved the extended release and long-acting opioid analgesics REMS, that there was a REMS specifically for Senta ER?
I wouldn't know that, sir.
Okay. Let me hand you a document that's been marked as Exhibit J1369. Can I approach you?
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
So Exhibit J1369 is a document entitled NDA 200533, Senta ER, Tapentadol tablets, opioid analgesic. The initial date of approval, August 25, 2011. Have you ever seen before the document we've marked as Exhibit J1369?
No, sir.
In reaching the opinions that you've offered here in court, did you consider whether there was an approved REMS for Senta ER that provided information about that drug to physicians?
No, frankly, the whole concept of a REMS was new to me, and I think it occurred during the time that I was a fellow. But it exists because I think there was concern over how these medications were being marketed and put out there. These were efforts to try to rein in the information and make it judicious expression of the studies, of the literature.
And I'm not sure what question you're answering, sir, but this was approved August 2011, correct?
Yes.
You were in practice in August of 2011, correct?
Yes, and
You were licensed and you were registered to prescribe Schedule II opioids, correct?
yes,
One of those drugs was Senta ER. I know you don't remember how much you did, but you at least were authorized to write a prescription for that drug, right?
sir, I'm answering the question, was I aware of this REMS program? And I'm explaining that I wasn't because the whole concept of REMS was new to me because no other medication has a REMS program, as far as I know. It was implemented because of the misinformation campaigns. So no, I was not aware of this REMS program.
I'm not asking you back then, I'm asking you now.
Well,
You're here as an expert witness today, June 6, 2019.
Yes,
I'm asking you about what you did in arriving at the opinions that you're giving here in court, okay?
well, now that
My
it's...
question is, and maybe an easy answer,
Sure.
if you didn't ever look at this, but did you consider in arriving at your opinions the information that was available to physicians about Senta ER in the FDA-approved REMS?
I object. That's beyond the scope of direct. I didn't even ask any questions about this. This has gone on for quite a while. It's beyond the scope of anything you did here at
reason they didn't ask, Your Honor. The point is, what information was in the market and available? He's offering opinions that doctors had misinformation, and not just that their decisions were impacted now. So I'm entitled to ask if he considered whether other information, and we won't go over it with him, but we'll go over it with other witnesses, that details FDA-approved uses, indications, dosage, and risks, and other information.
Objection overruled.
Sorry, I was not aware of the REMS program for new Senta ER. None of the representatives had ever brought it up to me.
Sir, I'm asking about your expert opinion today.
Yes.
Today, you're aware of REMS, right?
You put it in front of me. Yes, I am.
Okay, so my question is, could be an easy answer. Did you consider, in reaching your opinions that you've offered here in court, the information that was available to physicians about Nucynta ER in the FDA-approved REMS program?
No, I'm telling you that I haven't. This is the first I've seen this, as far as I recall.
Thank you. There's been discussion in this case about everyday pain. And do you consider everyday pain to be pain severe enough to require daily, around-the-clock, long-term opioid treatment?
Can you repeat that question?
Sure. Do you consider everyday pain to be pain severe enough to require daily, around-the-clock, long-term opioid treatment?
So just the question alone reflects a lot of bias, and I'm not going to get into that because I know you'll be upset with me. But no, I don't.
Okay. So, is everyday pain a medical term?
Everyday, no.
Would you find the phrase everyday pain in medical literature?
No.
Are there guidelines that discuss everyday pain?
Sir, everyday pain is such a vague statement. If you're specifically talking about something in particular, yes, then it would be included in medical statements. But everyday pain could be just referenced as what a patient's experience is, which a physician should take into consideration and consider a treatment plan for, or it could be something that you and I experience. It's just so user interpretable. I'm not sure what you're trying to ask.
Well, I'm just asking one question after another.
Sure.
Is there an ICD code that's available for the diagnosis of everyday pain?
There's an ICD code for chronic pain syndrome. That's about the closest thing that I can think of in reference to what you're asking.
Would you use that to diagnose everyday pain?
I personally would not, because I think it's a vague diagnosis. The value of a diagnosis is something that's going to help you get to a long-term solution for a patient, and something like everyday pain or chronic pain syndrome, it doesn't help us get anywhere. It doesn't help specify a condition.
Are you familiar with Sooner Care?
I'm sorry, who?
Sooner Care.
Sooner Care. No, I assume that has something to do with Oklahoma's insurance system.
Have you ever received prior insurance authorization for an opioid used to treat everyday pain?
I have received prior authorization for medications. I couldn't tell you, given the fact that everyday pain is a very vague statement, I couldn't tell you if I've ever used it for something akin to that.
In your deposition, you talked about evidence-based medicine. Remember that?
Yes.
And I assume that means medicine and decisions that are being made based on evidence, not gut instincts or speculation, right?
Right.
And in court, we have evidence too. So can you point me to any Johnson & Johnson or Janssen promotional material for Duragesic, Nucynta, or Nucynta ER that states that those drugs are appropriate treatment to be used for everyday pain?
Well, given the fact that it's specified that it's for moderate or severe pain, well, you're talking about quantity of pain versus origin of pain. Everyday pain could be moderate to severe. So, logic would say then yes, the content is being insinuated that it can be utilized for everyday pain. And frankly, that's how physicians did interpret it from the campaigns that Johnson & Johnson conducted.
Now, let me go back then, because maybe I misunderstood your prior testimony. Are you saying that the FDA-approved indication of the use of an opioid for moderate to severe chronic pain is everyday pain?
Sir, you're conflating two different things. So everyday pain would be timing. Moderate to severe would be severity. These are two different elements, and it doesn't mean it could be a Venn diagram. They could be mutually exclusive, or they could be in and of the same condition.
So are you saying that if everyday pain, which you say is timing, right?
Yes.
Doesn't really deal with severity?
So when we qualify
Just answer my question. Are you saying, if I understand it correctly,
yes.
that when you're talking about everyday pain, you're considering that to address timing, not severity, right?
Well, that's what everyday is it's a time reference.
Okay, but not severity, right?
Correct.
Severity is the moderate to severe, right?
Right. I mean, when we talk about pain, we talk about different qualifications. There's timing, severity, onset, what aggravates it, what alleviates it. These are all things that help us qualify or determine pain.
Just 1 second. So, would you admit, doctor, that you have a bias against the use of opioids?
No, sir.
Would you agree, doctor, that you have a bias against the use of prescription opioids for the treatment of non-cancer chronic pain?
Sir, I use opioids for patients who have chronic non-cancer pain. I've used it since I was a fellow at MD Anderson, where we treated both cancer patients and patients in remission who still had daily, every single day common aches and pains.
Try again. Do you have a bias against more liberal use of prescription opioids for the treatment of long-term chronic pain?
It depends on how you define liberal. If you're talking liberal like every 3 hours versus, periodically throughout the week, for me, periodically throughout the week is a liberal statement. For somebody else, it may not be. So I can't say if I'm biased about that unless you specify a quantity that you mean by liberal.
So do you think you come into this court with no bias?
I never said that. You're putting words in my mouth.
And you had testified earlier when you were asked by counsel, and are you committed to helping to change the conversation about proper pain management? You said, I wouldn't be here if I wasn't. Do you recall that?
Sir, I don't think that's a wrong statement. I want to have a dialogue about what is appropriate use of opioids. I want to have a dialogue of how we can better address pain. And when you ask me, do I have a bias against opioids, that's painting me into a corner that I don't appreciate. I'm an anesthesiologist who uses opioids on a regular basis, but I think it's incumbent upon me to help educate not just the medical community, but the general public at large about what is pain and how ineffective opioids have been in treating it, that we need to have the conversation about how to better address pain for those undertreated pain patients.
And you're an advocate, aren't you? That's what PROP does, right?
Sir, I'm an advocate of my opinion.
Right. Absolutely. We can all agree with that. And isn't it true, to advocate your opinion in court, you're getting paid $850 an hour?
You have to understand that...
Just answer my question, doctor. It's a very simple question.
Sir, I'm
Just
not
answer
seeing
my
patients
question.
this week. I have a clinic with 13 other people.
Sir, please answer my question. Your counsel can then ask you to explain it. Isn't it true that as you sit in that witness stand, you're being paid by the state $850 an hour?
Which does not meet my overhead.
Can you answer my question, yes or no?
The answer is yes.
And your testimony has been that one of your mentors, who you so respect, was influenced by the fact that he was provided funding by a pharmaceutical company, correct?
Nobody came and chased me down to offer me money to say these opinions. These are things that if you look in my history, if you look at the track record of information that I've put out, it has been consistent since the day I started my practice in 2010, which is that opioids are overprescribed, that the information about it has been inaccurate and misrepresenting of the science, and that I'm here to try to change it. I came to Kentucky because of that reason, because I want to make a difference. I want people to both be better treated for pain and for the people who have substance abuse disorders or substance dependency, for those patients not to die. I don't want to present more people from this population into this population.
What question do you think you're answering now?
Sir, I'm answering your question about whether I am biased by the what I get paid to be here.
Let me just ask you this, Doctor. When you were asked to come here to testify, to talk about the misinformation campaign that you believe caused the opioid crisis, did you ask why they were asking you, a doctor who wasn't even practicing as the opioid crisis was developing, and a doctor who isn't licensed and doesn't practice in Oklahoma, why they were picking you to be the one?
Yes, because I grew up in the era of the misinformation campaign. My generation of physicians was never exposed to the opioid conservatism that prior generations were. And so my exposure was pretty in-depth as far as misinformation. I was fortunate enough to be guided outside of that, to understand the biases, to understand how to read literature and interpret it correctly so that I can understand when the representatives come up and give me misinformation, or when I go to a CME and there's content. I've walked out of CMEs because the content was so poor.
And we've heard that before, Doctor. We've heard that.
So
And you've
that's
been
why
employed-
that's why they asked me to come, is because I have that insight knowledge.
That's fine. Isn't it true that you were suggested to be an expert for the state by your colleague, Dr. Kolodny?
Sir, it's not just Andrew Kolodny.
Can you just answer my question?
He introduced me.
Thank you. No more questions.
Before you sit down, Mr. Yoder, you had referenced J1369. I don't think we heard if you wanted to admit that into evidence.
It's the new Senta REMS.
Yes, Your Honor. I'd move 1369 in.
Does the state object? Okay, state, sorry. J1369 will be admitted into the evidence.
Thank you.
Ma'am, do you mind putting that back up? The last image that was on the screen before Mr. Yoder finished? Thank you. Dr. Maslow-induced, you were asked some questions early on in the cross-examination about this chart as they put it together. Do you recall those questions?
Yes, I do.
Specifically, you were asked around 2010, 2011, when you had started your pain management practice, whether or not the opioid crisis was in full swing. Do you remember that?
I do.
And in fact, they've overlaid these charts here showing deaths going up, right?
Yes.
They've shown, does it also show treatment admissions going up?
Yes.
It also shows that sales of opioids are going up.
Yes.
All together.
Yes.
Full swing of the opioid crisis. And you just testified, I believe, that your generation of physicians was educated during and graduating in the midst of this crisis.
Yes.
Mike, can we go to the next slide that we have? Now, Doctor, this is a slide that's been used in this trial so far. And it depicts Johnson & Johnson's sales rep visits from 94 to 2017. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now there's a timeline down there at the bottom. And attention was drawn to the last slide, to the years 2010, 2011, right?
Yes.
Full swing of the opioid crisis.
Correct.
Can you tell me how many Johnson & Johnson sales reps visits were made in 2010, 2011, 2012?
There's no foundation that he has any knowledge of that, just reading the slide.
It's admitted into evidence, Judge. It's just rebutting what they did.
Objection overruled.
It's not an admitted evidence, Your Honor.
The sales call notes are admitted into evidence. The boxes were scattered across this entire front of this courtroom. There were so many of them. This is a depiction of those very call notes.
He hasn't reviewed them, Your Honor. He has no knowledge of how many there are. Not serving any purpose.
And he heard the testimony
Overrule the objection.
during the full swing of the opioid crisis. How many sales rep calls did Johnson & Johnson do here in Oklahoma in 2010?
16,258 in 2010, 18,388 in 2011, and 18,264 in 2012.
They doubled down, didn't they?
They did. So, frankly, the point that I was trying to make earlier was, even though the opioid epidemic was beginning, it continued to rise after that. And the conversations that I had at that time were, why do we need another opioid in the midst of an opioid epidemic? Why do we need another opioid given the fact that we already have plenty that are problematic? That wasn't a conversation just me in an inner circle. Those were conversations that I was having among colleagues in various medical societies.
Thank you, Doctor. Now, this is another slide that we've used, and it's depicting the unintentional prescription drug-related overdose death rates in opioid sales right here in Oklahoma. Do you see that?
Yes,
You've seen slides similar to this in the past, right?
I have.
Have you seen graphs like this in other states around the country?
They're very similar.
And you understand this is Oklahoma specific.
Yes.
Okay, based on this and your knowledge of other trends around the country, did we have a prescription opioid crisis in the early 90s?
Yeah, we certainly did. We certainly did. The opioid epidemic was ramping up during my medical education, and I was privy to seeing the changes that were taking place in the medical community, the influences that were coming into our institutions of education and influencing the next generation of physicians, trying to get more and more people ascribing to the belief that opioids have an efficacy. That was the most fundamental mistake, because it was never proven to have long-term efficacy. Short-term efficacy, yes. Cancer and palliative pain efficacy, yes. Proof of those two existed. But to extrapolate that into a short-term setting, into a long-term setting, was never established. Those conversations were never had. So all of these conversations about overdose and safety concerns were kind of moot points, given the fact that the efficacy was never established to us.
Now, before the misinformation campaign started,
Yes,
did we have a prescription opioid crisis?
we did not.
All right, you were asking questions about the REMS programs. Do you recall that?
Yes,
You were handed a number of different documents showing some of the content from REMS programs. Do you recall that?
yes.
And are those REMS programs mandatory or volunteer-based?
Volunteer.
You don't have to go to them as a physician.
No.
Do you know whether or not it's commonplace for pharmaceutical companies who manufacture opioids to recruit physicians to come to REMS programs?
I wasn't aware of that, no.
All right, doctor. Now, you saw all those companies listed on the front of those REMS documents. Did you
Yes.
see that?
I did.
And in fact, if you don't mind grabbing those, there's one that was pulled out that has a long list. It's the long-acting opioids REMS. Do you have that?
Yes, that's the one I'm most familiar with.
Okay, and that's the one you worked on, right?
Correct.
What's the exhibit number? Can you read that to us?
It's J2148.
Can you put that up, Mike, and blow that up, please? And by worked on, I just mean you didn't put this material together. You presented at one of these REMS programs, right?
No, in fact, the requisite to present was that you can't modify any of the content. You can't take any of the content out. But like I said, I felt it incumbent upon me to give that presentation as opposed to somebody else who would just do it verbatim, because I asked if I could put in my own slides to reflect the biases that were there. And I'd be happy to talk about those if there was time.
Were you permitted to put in your own slides?
They allowed me to do so, yes.
Okay. Now, do you see Janssen listed number 3 on this list?
Yes, I do.
Do you see activists listed at the top of this list?
Yes.
What about Purdue Pharma?
Yes, it's listed.
Rhodes Pharmaceuticals?
Yes.
Sandoz?
Yes.
Watson Laboratories?
Yes. All of these manufacturers, so the format of the presentation was a convincing argument that long-acting opioids are safer, which has never been proven. In fact, it's been disproven. It's never been proven. And then towards the end of the lecture, there's a whole section listing out each of these branded medications and how they're to be utilized or how effective they are, which to me gives the insinuation that these are medications to use in these non-malignant cases.
Dr. Maslow-Nust, what did you say the purpose of REMS programs were?
Risk evaluation mitigation strategies.
And I believe you testified that the intent was to bring awareness to the misinformation about opioids.
Yeah, it's a bait and switch.
So, have you ever heard of the phrase, a fox guarding the henhouse?
Yes,
Is that appropriate here?
very much so.
Now, you were also handed, 6 or so studies. And
Yes,
Mr. Yoder asked you if you would rely on those studies in preparation for your testimony. You recall that?
yes, I do.
There's one that has HHS public access on the front of it.
I believe I know which study you're talking about.
You grab that, please. Exhibit.
This is one of our to-be named court exhibits.
Oh, that's right. It's not been named yet.
We'll go back in the record and refer to this as the correct court exhibit number. You might want to describe it, though, for the record.
The title is Pharmacotherapy for Neuropathic Pain in Adults, Systemic Review, Meta-Analysis, and Update of NEU PSIG Recommendations.
Thank you, doctor. Do you see the section on the very first page? There's a big, long paragraph with a little bold title in front of it. You see that?
Yes,
What's that title say?
it says conflicts of interest.
It's showing a ton of conflicts of interest with pharmaceutical companies, isn't it?
Yes,
And may I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Now I'm going to show you my copy, which I've highlighted to speed this up so you're not up here too long. And this is the same exhibit you've got in front of you.
Yes, it
Court
is.
exhibit. Same title.
yes,
All right. Do you see Teva Pharmaceuticals listed there?
yes,
Do you see Mundi Pharma?
yes,
Do you see Johnson & Johnson?
yes,
Do you see Janssen Selag?
yes,
Do you see Mundi Pharma again?
yes,
How about Purdue Pharma?
yes,
Do you see Allergan listed
Yes.
there? Do you see Johnson & Johnson again?
right at the top.
Do you see many others?
Yes,
And that's just one of the studies that you were given. The others also demonstrated conflicts of interest, didn't they?
yes.
With pharmaceutical companies.
Yes, and I believe even in these studies, there was insufficient or inadequate efficacy evidence.
Thank you. We have no further questions, Dr. Maslow-Nust.
Just a few. So to be clear, in terms of the call notes, the only call notes you reviewed were, I think you said about 10 or so that were provided to you by counsel?
No, I think it was more than that. I don't recall how many.
20?
It's really hard for me to say, sir. I reviewed quite a number of call notes.
Whatever the number, they were given to you by counsel, correct?
Yes,
They selected what you were going to look at, correct?
they didn't have to, sir. The content that I was seeing was reflective of the stuff that I had experienced myself.
I just asked you, they selected what they gave to you, correct?
Even if it happens once, it's too much.
You're arguing again, sir. They provided you the call notes you reviewed, correct?
Yes, it only takes one drop of blood to taint the well.
Your Honor, I'd move that last comment as not.
So strike the comments, and again, Doctor, I'm going to remind you, if it's a yes or no question, answer.
Yes, sir.
Is it your view that pharmaceutical companies should not be allowed to fund research?
No,
Do you think there's something wrong with disclosing in research if there's any funding that's being provided by pharmaceutical companies?
no, but there's ample evidence that negative outcome studies are not published.
Okay, I'm just asking you, when a pharmaceutical company funds research that's published, do you think it's the right thing to do to disclose that funding?
I think it's the right thing to do,
Which
and I
is
also
what?
think it would be great if they would disclose all of the studies, not just the ones that succeed.
So, do you disagree with the FDA's decision to require pharmaceutical manufacturers to make training available through the REMS program?
Objection to the regulatory issues we've talked about. He's not here to agree or disagree with the FDA. We've made that abundant.
I'll sustain the objection.
Is it true that you were called upon by a Janssen sales representative to encourage you to enroll in the REMS for Senta ER?
Can you be more specific?
Just asking you, as a factual matter, is it true that you were approached by a Janssen sales representative to affirmatively solicit you to become part of, to enroll in the Senta ER REMS?
It's difficult for me to remember. If you give me context, I might.
Either you do or you don't.
I don't remember.
May I approach your own?
Yes, you may.
And what would the next number be? We can mark it.
3930.
You
Thank
seek
you.
admissions evidence.
We'll see. We'll try. Or we may not need to, Your Honor. So I've handed you, Doctor, a listing, a printout of call notes that reflect visits by Janssen sales rep to you with the message indicated as REMS. And you'll see there's probably, 12 or 15 of them?
Yes.
And you'll
I
see,
don't think we've ever seen this before. Was this produced in this litigation?
pardon?
I didn't hear the answer to the question. Was it produced to the state?
I don't know if it was or not, but we're trying to rebut testimony that he has given. I don't have the specifics of whether it was requested or not, or any of that, Your Honor. Right now, I'm just asking, I'm not seeking to admit it, I'm asking if it refreshes his recollection. And I can bring anything into court to refresh recollection.
Your Honor, this is internal Janssen
It works.
database printout. It wasn't produced in this litigation.
Well, certainly in keeping with the pretrial conference order, I'm not inclined to admit it as evidence. I'll give the defendants an opportunity to argue why it should be, but I'm going to let Mr. Yoder go ahead and proceed to ask questions. Again, probably not going to admit it as evidence unless we...
I understand, Your Honor. Does reviewing this listing, Doctor, refresh your recollection that you were called on by a Janssen sales representative more than 10 times to request that you enroll in the REMS for the new Senta ER launch?
Sir, I don't recall, and I'm actually surprised that they called on me that many times. I don't see any dates on here, so I don't know when this is referencing to.
It's hard to tell. Okay. Anyway, it doesn't refresh your recollection?
No, sir. That's why I'm asking for context.
Do you, sitting there, dispute that a Janssen sales representative came to you on multiple occasions to solicit you to enroll in the REMS for the new Senta ER launch?
Like I said, I don't recall.
Thank you.
Dr. Matheson, there's the excuse, Your Honor.
Yes, you may. Thank you very much, Dr. Madden.
Thank you.
Doctor.
Your Honor, as we discussed, we'll do the offer of proof that Dr. Madison
Okay, all right.
as we discussed earlier, we have a short offer of proof that will make orally.
All right. We'll go ahead and allow you to make the offer of proof at this time.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor sustained the state's objection to questions of Dr. Mazelman-Deuce about Exhibit J 3798. That's an exhibit that was admitted earlier by the court during the testimony of Ms. Dean Eshelman. It was described by her as the paper that was the sole output from the IPPC, the Imagine the Possibilities Pain Coalition, that she was questioned about during the examination by the state and on cross-examination by Mr. Ottaway. If permitted to examine Dr. Mazelman-Deuce about this paper that was the output of the IPPC, the questioning would have established the conclusion offered in this paper about what can be learned from the way veterans have been treated for pain upon returning from combat is consistent with what Dr. Mazelman-Deuce himself talked about doing for his patients in Kentucky, in particular the use of multimodal pain management as well as holistic care of those with complex pain conditions. And so if the objection had not been sustained as our offer of proof, we would have elicited the testimony from Dr. Mazelman-Deuce that the output, the sole output from the IPPC working group is a paper that is entirely consistent with what he advocates as the best approach to pain patients. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Broden. Before I excuse the attorneys, I'll need to have you come up and we can review all the exhibits that have been introduced as well as court exhibits. Other than that, we will adjourn and we will begin proceedings. We'll resume with the state's case in chief tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. You all may be excused. Come on up, attorneys.
Thank you, Your Honor.